good and social impact. So once again, welcome to the World Humanitarian Forum Davos Strategic Roundtable on Tech for Good. Now, what is the World Humanitarian Forum? It's the largest and most inclusive non-partisan forum in humanitarian and international development. WHF brings together decision makers and opinion formers in the public, private, and non-profit sectors, as well as the next generation of partnerships builders. And I think this is important because through annual convenings and digital services, WHF advances critical global discussions and transformed conversations into action, such as what we're doing here today. And as well as to provide a powerful forum to catalyze collaborations through shared value approach and social impact objectives. So this is really something that we want to talk about here today. And like, this is what we also want to talk about, like why Tech for Good can actually help us make more progress in this revolution that we're actually seeing. Now, let me start by saying, you know, where we are right now, we are at this start of this revolution that fundamentally is shifting how we live, work, and relate to one another. And so, you know, its scale, the scope, and the complexity, this transformation is unlike anything that we've experienced before. And so what we do not know yet is like how it's going to unfold. But one thing is clear, human behavior is going to change and nothing is going to be like it is today for humanity. And this is where, you know, humanity and the force for good are, you know, the new epicentres for the awakening. So this is what the World Humanitarian Forum calls the fifth revolution. And, you know, this is why I'm also really, really excited to be joined here today in the strategic roundtable by what's called, it's the Tech for Good programming board of the World Humanitarian Forum. So it's like esteemed speakers, experts, and visionaries and thought leaders in this drive towards, you know, how can technology help us to get there. Now, let me actually then just start to get into like some of the topics. And I was saying like, well, you know, the Tech for Good themes for 2022 for the World Humanitarian Forum, they're in different spaces. So we're talking about people. So everything from like, you know, vaccines, mindfulness, remote work, planet, which could be about energy transition or ESG compliance, prosperity, which could be about social spending, data, and then lastly, future, which would be like Web 3.0, the metaverse, and so on. But let's get straight into this, into our great panel introduction, because I don't know, like I wouldn't do anybody like a service to actually introduce yourself. Like I'll ask everybody on the forum today, like actually to join and introduce themselves. I'll start again. My name is Bernard Kovac. As the moderator, I'm also at the same time head of the Innovation Accelerator at the World Food Program, and I'll go in alphabetical order. So first up on my list is Alice. Alice, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Alice. I'm Managing Director and Chief Product Officer at Tech for Good.
Thank you. Jarmo.
Yes, my name is Jarmo Sareva. I'm the Ambassador for Cyber Affairs at the Foreign Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, based in Helsinki. Previously acted as Finland's first Ambassador for Innovation. Thank you.
Great to have you. Elizabeth, I actually jumped you, so like you're next.
Elizabeth Njoroge, working with Christian Aid as the International ICT Business Partner with a remit for Africa, Asia, Middle East, Latin America, and Caribbean. Thank you.
Great to have you as well. Michael.
Yeah, good to be here. Good to have everyone here. My name is Michael Chelve. I serve as Director of Innovation on a team within Microsoft Philanthropies called Tech for Social Impact.
Amazing. Michael.
Thank you, Bernard, and hello all around the world. Michael Walker here, CEO of Grabber Technologies, an identity security technology company.
Thank you. And then we have Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Spencer. I am an independent consultant, an expert on technology, humanitarian aid, and foreign policy, and also a British government official on sabbatical.
And see, I'm not going in order here, just to keep things fresh. Nicola, your turn.
Hello, I'm Nicola. I'm the Managing Director of Strong Enterprises, and I'm particularly interested in ethical AI and human-machine teaming.
Perfect. Now, what a wonderful group of people, both what you've chosen to actually do with your lives and your mission, but then also like the thought leadership that you're bringing to the table here. And let us get straight into the topic about the topic of tech for good. And there's a lot of talk about, tech, how tech for good can positively impact people, planet, and prosperity. Like it's on everybody's mind. But I'll get my first question to Alice. Like, I mean, what do you see as, key success factors for tech for good, and, how do you actually solve people's problems?
Sure. So I think technology should be designed and built for people and for our planet and for a prosperous future on this planet. And I believe that the success factor actually lies at the conjunction of those three elements, and also trust. So the fact that, the trust is declining at the moment is a little bit like concerning for us at the technology sector. I also think that the role of humanitarian organizations in leading the change is declining a little bit. So at least according to Gen Zs, I think they believe a lot more in empowering local communities that are at the heart of the problem. So if you think about, Me Too, BLM, indigenous people tackling climate change, all this type of movements, they're kind of like created by youngsters or kind of empowered by youngsters. And obviously technology is an enabler, so it helps to make these things happen. And we wonder like how many more things like that would be happening in the future. But what is important to emphasize here is like, technology is not a magic bullet. And I think it's really important for our panel today to also kind of touch on this. So it cannot solve all the humanitarian problems on its own, and it shouldn't, frankly speaking. I think the humanity is still the key agent of change. And I think technology should be tailored for our needs, for the needs of the humanity to actually serve and be the force for good.
Absolutely. No, and I think there's lots of different aspects that are there as creating success factors. And like, I want to add on to this, go straight to Jarmo actually to ask, because Alice was mentioning like, young people, but like also like the tech sector, like what do you see as the, the roles of the public sector or the private sector? Like, how do you work together, or is the one more important than the other?
Yeah, thanks. Let me start by saying that the multi-stakeholder approach is an absolute must in this. Governments alone cannot do it. But for each one of the stakeholders that you listed, the point of departure has to be human centricity and human-centric design. As for the public sector, it has to be a regulator which promotes innovation and a level playing field. It also has to fund early stage startups. And what is needed in the public sector is resistance to lobbying by vested interests, which often do not have human centricity as their starting point, and a willingness to accept risk in funding early stage startups. Now, next, the private sector. Of course, we know that the private sector is the engine and source of innovation. And compared to the tech of past, pretty much everything that comes from the private sector is dual use of both the good and the bad kind. So compared to the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's a wholly different ballgame. Startups, increasingly, and I have seen this here in the Nordic region being especially strong, it is startups that have their values right. Many of them understand that doing good is actually good for business. And in bigger corporations, there's also a pressure to do good, tech for good, that comes from from shareholders, from their customers, and also from investors. So tech for good is coming increasingly to the mainstream. Then NGOs, civil society, they have an important function in keeping everybody else honest. And importantly, they also often have the best sense of the real needs out there among people at the human level. And finally, on academia, they can be a crucial source of innovation at the human-centric level as well, through both basic and applied research. So that's it. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, and like I think it's a good overview that you're giving us in terms of like that all the groups have different strengths that they can play and the role that they can play if we really want to achieve change on the planet. Now, then maybe let me go to Nicola, just because like you have a different background. So like, and you've seen lots of different technology approaches. Like, how do you make sure that they actually reach the intended people positively and avoid unintended consequences?
I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things that I'm really excited by is that there's a lot of really good work out there. And it's about connecting that really good work to those who need it. And I think if you have an issue or something that really troubles you, do check. It's worth actually looking to the wider world to see what people are doing to help you. I think the thing that I'd like to reinforce that's already been talked about is that connection, that sort of idea of inclusion and empowering the local people who are actually dealing with or under difficult situations. I think really keeping the people at the center of any design. And I think also there's something about collaborating, make quite sure that all the stakeholders, each of the sort of stakeholders have their own fiefdom, they have their own areas of control. And I think it's really important to keep those connections very, very strong. I think the other thing that struck me is that, and it was mentioned, I think, in one of the Davos meetings recently, is that we really need to think about helping the law and governance bodies to connect and help them keep up. Because of course they have to sort of run behind us trying to find out how they can in fact hold some sort of regulatory sort of framework. And I think about how your system can go to scale. So often when a system is in fact designed on a very local basis, the designers may not necessarily think about the scale that they need to make it to work on a much bigger sort of community situation. And finally, the data. I think how we manage our data and how we appreciate and respect it is going to be even more vital. So those are some of the ideas that I have around how we can perhaps avoid unintended consequences.
No, and this is a great example. Again, I think this is bringing it actually together from like what Alice was saying about like humans and design as well, like the different stakeholders from Yarma. Like also right now, it's not only about like solving people's problems at like the grassroots level, like maybe like local entrepreneurs, but then also how to scale it. And to a certain extent, sometimes this can be a challenge, which like also in my experience with the World Food Program, we always try to be like, human-centered, like we're trying to solve a real problem, and then we are trying to actually get that to scale, which is interesting because inherently, like once you start trying to solve somebody's problem, like, you really need to understand this problem that you're trying to solve, and it might be only very small, but I totally agree with you. If it doesn't scale, then we never will actually reach those the goals that we have set out to achieve for ourselves and the world. Then maybe let me move like to the next round, which is slightly different. I want to take us to a different lens here, and like because of the background of the panel here is also I want to talk about like the biggest technology opportunity here. Whereas like of course when we're talking about tech for good, it's like technology is a key element of this. So I'm going to kick this off with Michael, and you're working for one of the largest tech companies on the planet, but like where do you see the biggest positive impact potential in terms of technology?
Yeah, as we look across the world today, there's no shortage of challenges where the application of technology has at least potential to drive real positive impact. However, it's also clear that it's not enough just to make the technology available. What we may see in the technology sector as the best thing since sliced bread, and which may have had true and tested success in other sectors, like, for example, manufacturing, that does not necessarily carry over to value in the humanitarian sector. So it's important to keep in mind that good technology does not organically lead to good outcomes. So I see the biggest impact potential as coming from partnerships. And so specifically for humanitarian scenarios, the challenges, they're often so vast, so complex and interconnected with other challenges that no single stakeholder can really provide a complete and exhaustive solution. Successful implementation of technologies requires a deep understanding of the local context in which the technology will be used. So we in the technology sector really depend on the expertise and the unique insights of our partners in the humanitarian organizations, as well as the stated needs of their beneficiaries. So having this information, having these insights, this then allows us to build the technologies, build the solutions in a way where we can optimize conditions for more broad and equitable access to the benefits of modern technology.
So in a way, you are saying it's not necessarily about technology, but also like how we are implementing it, or like what problems we are solving again. I mean,
exactly.
And then would you have, like, if you're saying like, what is the single biggest technology that could be the game changer for when we're talking about tech for good? Is it like artificial intelligence? Is it mobile? Like what would be your biggest?
Yeah, I think definitely artificial intelligence has all the potential to have massive impact across the board, but it's a question of finding the right application to really understanding where there is a need, where AI may be a good tool from the toolbox and where it may be something else. But obviously, yes, just the potential and the power and the potential impact that comes with AI once it's applied to the appropriate scenarios has definitely a tremendous positive potential.
Nice. So let's ground this in realities in developing countries. So I'll go to Sarah and actually, looking in developing countries in particular, what would be, one example that where you've seen like, where tech really opened up a big new opportunity, but maybe also like what the pitfalls were that you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the biggest opportunities isn't perhaps necessarily technology specific as the way that Michael has framed it as well, is really looking at the opportunities to make some movement and accelerate progress towards the localization agenda. I think a lot of the humanitarian actors operating in this space tend to gravitate towards larger technology firms, which historically have been based in the West. And there are some really interesting startups and startup cultures in Sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, working with using artificial intelligence and machine learning, for example, to develop predictive models related to natural disasters, which can help improve the response time in humanitarian action. So I think there's a real need for the sort of, big beasts of the humanitarian industries, including UN agencies and large NGOs, to start looking at how they can shift the supply chain and from whom they procure their technology. But just to go back onto a point that Michael raised, I think is really important when we think about humanitarian aid and operating in conflict environments. The environment in which these technologies are deployed is necessarily different than peacetime environments. And we have all seen that across the last decade. You can look at, the use of social media in Myanmar and the Rohingya crisis as one very popular example, but there's plenty ongoing and very live examples at the moment with ongoing conflicts. So I think it behooves technologists and technology firms to improve their due diligence processes, be a bit more conflict sensitive as to how their technologies can be deployed in active conflicts for ill or unintended consequences, and to be a bit more careful about what that looks like. So they have taking a conflict sensitive approach to technology.
Yeah, no, like it's definitely a good challenge that you're also posing to all of us is like, on the one hand, like when we are trying to work with like local entrepreneurs from developing countries, I mean, I see this all the time, like as a World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, like every couple of months we receive 700 to 800 applications. Typically we'll now have, I would say 60 to 70% of those coming from Africa. And like one of the hard truths is that a lot of times the entrepreneurs, they might have the best ideas and they might have the best solutions, but maybe they don't have the access to capital, or maybe they don't have the role model, or maybe they don't have the same level of skill in like actually building data security into their solution. Like there's a very interesting aspect that you're bringing in here, whereas like on the one hand, like it's a little bit like how do we get and move towards this point? And like this is very, very interesting. And I want to actually then ask Micah, because you are a tech entrepreneur, and maybe like people who are listening to this, I mean, if you were to start a new company, what would be interesting areas to explore where you're saying, wow, like somebody listening, like this is what you should go for?
Thank you very much. And in this sort of uncertain time and what we just referred to, it's uncertain, yet that creates demand for new technologies to be used. And the startup environment of the world is just getting bigger and bigger. I think it's a blend of technologies. I think it's a blend of using the Industrial Revolution 4.0, so those AI and machine learning technologies for good. Obviously, we want all technology to be for good. We don't believe any technology should be for bad. Unfortunately, what we just discussed was that unfortunately, sometimes it isn't used always for good. However, if we have security by design, then we should also have humanitarian by design, or human by design. So secure, mobile, and personally owned data. Now that's easier said than done, but it can be done. There are companies out there doing it now. Things like the Data Swift wallet that allows citizens to own all of their own data, so that our data isn't being on-sold. And it really helps to prevent some of these attacks. And there's a lot of threats and risks in the humanitarian world at the moment, where the most vulnerable people are having their data, unfortunately, at risk. And this is happening in organizations as well. So I think the security and threat mitigation happens at the design phase. We are definitely involved in creating technologies that have immutable, unforgeable credentials. And these only exist in the person's environments. This only exists on sort of like the personal PDA environment. So Bernard, I would sort of say it's a blend of all of this ecosystem of technologies. And we sort of sometimes talk about Industrial Revolution 5.0, which harnesses all of the technology-led, supply chain-led innovations, but actually takes it to a human position. So we design security and privacy into this. And I'll keep it brief. And this discussion is just going into an amazing direction. So thank you.
No, and it is fascinating what you're saying also, right? Like if people want to start a company or a new startup, it's like what you actually set out to do. Maybe to follow up on this also, Michael, like, so let's say if somebody now is in the audience and saying, wow, I really feel strongly about this problem, but then, I'm also engaged in a startup that actually does something that I'm not caring about. Like, what is there something like, and I mean, you're an accomplished entrepreneur yourself. So like, what is it that you would advise somebody who's like, wow, I'm in front of this career choice now, or like it's my life choice. Like, what should they do?
I think there's always a purpose beyond profit. If we're an employee or a self-employed entrepreneur or an advocate or an activist, there's always a, beyond profit or beyond what puts food on the table for us, there's always a purpose. We are the privileged few, and we need to take the skills and the technologies that we know how to build and give them to the underprivileged vast majority of the world. So there are so many ways to do that, rather than if this was a person at home thinking of, building a blockchain, immutable log or some kind of a hash, something very, very simplistic that could scale. Instead of on selling that to Activision, who just got, secured billions of dollars of shareholder revenue, putting that in the hands of the UN, putting that in the hands of World Humanitarian Forum, putting that in the hands of some of the governments that are really grappling with how to protect data. Some of the most vulnerable people in the world are having their data accessed without their permission. And so we certainly believe that we don't have the ability to own anyone's data, that it can only be maybe issuing a passport, maybe taking a picture of your face, but at that point in time, you should own your own data. So anything around the ownership and protection of individual citizens' data, and that is so many things, Bernard, we could get into many rabbit holes with, but they are the AI and ML and this sort of technologies that are around security of ownership of the data, ownership of an asset. Think of food security, think of ownership and proof that the food is going to the correct place, that the infrastructure is going to the correct place.
Nice. No, and like I want to then bring this back to developing countries, and like Elizabeth has witnessed a lot what can be achieved through technology, specifically working on some of the world's biggest challenges of some of the most vulnerable people on the globe. And I just bring this to you, like, where do you see the biggest opportunity in terms of like, technology, or like what do you see is exciting?
I think I would add my way to the localization agenda. But in this case, let me say that the people that we are working with and the communities that we are working with, how are we moving with them? We're talking about the SDGs, we are talking about 2030, we are talking all these about the climate change and all this that we want to solve the world's problem. But how engaged are our communities in terms of that? And technology can be able to be a game changer in how they understand what is this SDG, what do they mean to them, and what is their role in us ensuring that they are able to get that. As Sarah has said, we have seen so many local countries coming up with very smart, let's call them smart innovations or technology innovations, so you may. I think I have seen one of the participants in the call asking about disability. So in Kenya, I think there is one person who has come up with a smart glove, a glove that is able to interpret the sign language into voice. So, well, that may have been recognized by the head of state, but it just ends up there. How do we scale that? How do we help that? And I think the other challenge that we are seeing affecting the local tech companies in the developing part of the world is if the tech startup, or rather, if these innovations do not have, let me use the Mzungu for this case. Mzungu, I hope all of us understand Mzungu is a white person, or if you do not have that kind of a person within your organization, then that means you do not get enough funding to run your business, or rather to scale. That has been really a very big challenge for the startups that are coming up. And woe unto you if that even startup is even led by a woman. It's still, statistics is showing that they're still lagging behind in terms of how we are supporting this. So I think that's an area that we can be able to improve. It's a great opportunity for the innovations. And perhaps, and I know, Bernard, you're working in the accelerator program and you are supporting startup, and probably would like also to hear how that has been working on your end in terms of, does this play in terms of having the Mzungu? I actually saw somebody mentioned that there is a Mzungu actually, especially in Kenya, who is moving around now. He's offering his services. I can be a part of your company so that you can get funding, which is a very wrong way of solving some kind of these things. But that's the challenge that is available there. But still an opportunity that you can be able to move towards helping the local innovations. And more so, even in the organizations that we are working with, I know we are coming up with solutions, but these solutions are from our HQ. So the conversation here has been HQ versus the field offices. So we will have that the solutions are developed from the HQ, brought to the field offices, sometimes not bringing that kind of ownership, but they're just pushed down, and sometimes they never work because we haven't kind of had that engagement. So if we even let, for instance, the people in Africa decide what is their most challenging problem at the moment, and how best can they be able to and support that, which can be scaled up to the HQ, so that we can have a two-way kind of communication, or rather driving the innovations within the organization. And that can also scale down to our communities that we are working with. Perhaps it's something that we are trying to solve in, let's say, Nigeria. And that is something that you can be able to task the local community to come up with those innovations and support them, even at the various organizations that we are working with. I think the other one to say is the emerging technologies, and 5G, AI remains, I think, the big one, as Michael has said. I think that is still one of our biggest. We have a lot of data out here, whether it is in social media, whether it is in the organization that you're working with, we still do not have trust to use that data and have a common data warehouse where we can be able to analyze that data and make informed decisions, even as we respond to disasters, or even as we map out either our humanitarian response or our various plans that we are making for the countries of operations. We have these segmented kind of solutions that we are having running through the various organizations. So if we invested in having all that data, analyzing that data would mean that we are making more informed decisions, and we are channeling the resources to the right places so that we do not have duplication of efforts in the countries of operation. And the last one is on climate change. I don't think we have done enough in climate change, but I think we still have a lot of innovations that you can be able to drive within climate change. It still remains, we are still talking about it within our various organizations, but we haven't got down to thinking of what innovations there are and how we can be able to support our countries.
No, very, very important point. Like, and I think this is where, you know, coming back to like, what are the opportunities of technology or startups or like local entrepreneurs, and like, how do those things go to scale? We go back to like some of what has been mentioned before, including from also Jarmo mentioned about, like, for instance, the aspect of like governments and risk capital, like what has to happen to actually allow this. Like, there's definitely an element here where if we take a step back and if you ask me, there's overall not enough funding for the type of innovations or technologies, let alone for innovations and technologies that are locally led in or female led in or from developing countries. So like, this is where like all the challenges that we're seeing like on a global scale are exacerbated when you talk about like a lot of the developing country environments, when it comes to like availability of funding, support infrastructure, and so on. And like, this is, I can tell you from my perspective, that's like, we are trying actively to look for startups, for instance, that are led by female founders, or like the founding team has female team members on it. Of course, the other question is like, we assess all of the innovations that we are allowing in our accelerator program. Are those innovations supportive of gender equality? Are they fostering gender equality or not? Like, because I think there's different lenses that we also have to apply here. One is like, you know, okay, where are the teams coming from, and what's their makeup, and like how do they have access? Like, the other thing is like, what are they actually doing? And I think this is important, and a couple of you were actually touching upon this. Now, maybe Elizabeth, if you allow me, just one follow-up question in terms of, because you were saying like, so there's several elements also in terms of technologies. Like, is there one thing in particular that you're really excited about, that you say like, this is the one thing, if that could work, then everything is going to be a lot better?
I think beyond getting the technologies down to our communities, I think the skills, the digital skills and literacy amongst our communities, I think remains at large there. So I think if we manage to come up with ways that we can be able to educate our communities and beneficiaries, I think it will be a game changer, because in some cases, yes, some have the technologies, the internet is there, but probably they do not know how to make maximum potential of that. For instance, giving an example of social media and probably even making adverts for them. When we went into the pandemic, there were so many people who were locked out of business because all they knew was just go every day, open up your shop and wait for customers to come. So when the pandemic came, that meant you cannot sell. Did they know social media exists? Of course they did, but all they know is I can share my commodities through probably the WhatsApp message, just like that. And sometimes we find those messages annoying. I could just post on my Facebook page, and hopefully that people can be able to see and they will buy. But very few people knew that you can also be able to use the ads, and the ads probably does not take a lot of time. You can be able to record your various experience of your products and be able to market that and get a lot of traction to your let's say to your sales. And for some of the organizations that I worked with in the initial period, they've really scaled for now, and they are now what would I say? They are now cognizant of how to make use of social media. But that's just to say that the digital literacy will go very long way in ensuring that having the technologies are there and having even the devices are there to close the gap in ensuring that we are changing the lives of the people.
Absolutely, and I would agree also to say, like, you know, digital literacy or access to technology or knowing how to use that it becomes even more important when we talk about some of the advanced technologies like artificial intelligence or, blockchain or, robotics. It's like, of course, like the digital divide is getting even further, like if we're talking about like some of these advanced technologies. So like this, I think you're spot on in what you're saying, like actually this getting there. Maybe just for the audience to also know, like we have received some of the questions from you already in registrations. We're going to come to them towards like the later part in the panel. So like stay tuned. We are actually going to answer some of those questions. We probably won't have time for all of them that have been submitted in the registration. And maybe from some of the questions that are coming in through the chat, maybe we get to them also. Like there's a lot of interest, and I want to say thank you for the engagement, the excitement about the topic, and also wanting to join us in this conversation and also be participating in an active manner. Now, let me then actually take us to a next level where, we've spoken about what are the biggest technology opportunities and key success factors, and non-surprising, like it's not about technologies. A lot of times it's about like solving a real problem, making sure that, like what you're doing is scaling. But then I want to keep us like grounded in terms of like new trends and like opportunities that are there, right? And I'm gonna kick this off with Alice, because like I think there's so many exciting things happening, and there's so many new things that we can do right now that we couldn't do like maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years ago. And like, what are those things that you say? And like, and related, I'm gonna come with a follow-up question, but I'll let you answer this first.
Sure. Thanks, Bernard. I think, well, there's a lot of things that are happening. So, for example, we can better anticipate the demand for food and other emergency supplies, as you probably know, working on the World Food Program. So another thing that we learned from the pandemic is that we definitely know how to, maybe not doing it yet, but we know how to collect better health data and speed up the process of developing new drugs and vaccines, and actually even like predict the spread of the infectious disease like well in advance, which is like really, really nice. And it's the work that has been published a lot lately, not just by WHO, but by other amazing agencies all around the world, even country states. We can definitely monitor and better prepare for natural disasters, which is really nice work also been done by some UN agencies. We can monitor deforestation, surprisingly. I don't know why we didn't think about it before using satellite imagery. We can provide better financial aid, hopefully, and control every transaction made from it. Using blockchain, we can provide education, training, and even opportunities to pretty much everyone around the world. And we can provide better information, hopefully valid information most of the time, and mental health support to thousands of people simultaneously using all the existing technologies, including chatbots and whatnot. And finally, there's a lot of talk in town, and you probably mentioned it already, about things like Web3 and metaverse and all this kind of new and shiny ways of calling blockchain or AR, VR technologies. But it kind of like puzzles me a lot, because yes, it's maybe it's going to create a cultural shift in how we kind of like work, and then how we deal on the internet, for example, towards more privacy, maybe more equal opportunities. But I think we should definitely have a dialogue and brainstorming together with this group into not just the opportunities, but also risks that this type of technologies are posing for humanitarian sector specifically. So yeah.
Absolutely. And like I think this is where like what you're saying is spot on, where there are things that we are doing right now that has lots of opportunities. And like I oftentimes refer to this, like where think about cloud computing. If you're now starting a startup, and like we were just talking about earlier, like with Elizabeth also, like, and Sarah mentioned this too, about like, well, we need to local entrepreneurs. Like now all you need is you actually pay for a cloud service to host your app there. Before, you would have to buy a server, have the server hosted somewhere, and like in order to have connectivity there. And like there's lots of these types of like advances that are, that do make opportunities also more equitable for people across the planet. they are nowhere where they're supposed to be. Like I think that's like we do need to do a lot more, but like there is advantage and there's good things moving in a good direction. Maybe Alice, because you're talking about risks, like what would you say are like risks that you see, like also like given like all those new trends and new technologies?
Just let me address the first one, the equity and access. I think one good thing here about all the countries and the economies that are still catching up on kind of like digital divide type of issues, I think they don't have any legacy problems. And it kind of like helps them to kind of like cut through years and even kind of generations of like bad technology or technology that was kind of like completely unnecessary, and all these barriers that we have experienced in some kind of regions of the world. And it's very interesting to see Africa, like, you know, using mobile like a lot more advanced than people in kind of like US or Europe or anywhere else pretty much do, because they just like trust things that, you know, happen on their mobile phones. So like transactions, like all this microcredit stuff and microloans. It's like amazing to see this kind of like things happening. And I hope it's gonna be like that pretty much everywhere soon. So there's a lot to actually learn from this phenomena. And in terms of other risks, I would say risks are always there. I think one important thing is never be prepared for something like an ideal case scenario, especially with technology. So any technology you build or you use, I think you always have to create a mitigation plan or mitigation strategy, and always kind of like foresee, which is, I know it's an impossible thing to do, but kind of foresee all the unintended consequences. Like try to break your own kind of like idea multiple times before you even implement it. I think is one definitely good lesson to learn from at least like what we do at AI for Good. No matter what technology you use, there's always going to be an issue with connectivity, with lack of access, with disability and other type of barriers to access. So like think about, you know, the designing for the most vulnerable is something that we strive for. I think it's really, really important to always select the type of group which is like unique in terms of like access and in terms of like providing humanitarian help. I think it's definitely something that technology companies can learn from humanitarian sector and then scale. And I wish it would be like that. So yeah.
Nice. No, and like, and I think there's lots of like, you know, trends and like also changes that are happening. So like, I guess I'll ask somebody with like a government lens on this. So like Jarmo, like this is where, you know, what's your perspective of this? Like, as the world is evolving, do you think we're ever gonna go back to like less volatility, or are we rather gonna see more drastic changes? What's your view on that?
No, thanks. You know, Alice just made an important point, which is that technology you know, and the ever faster technological change also can hold great promise. But as with all things that are created by humans, you know, it can work both towards the good and for the bad. But you know, the question that you put to me is it's a $1 million question. And in my view, we are entering or have already entered a period of ever increasing volatility. You know, when humankind moved from the Middle Ages into what was then called the New Age, with technological change, new innovations, discovery of the Americas, and other, you know, groundbreaking things. It was a bit like what we are going through right now. But what is happening now is much more fundamental and infinitely faster. You know, black swans keep coming at us as you know, faster and faster. So what we have in our hands is you know, a combination of disruptive technological change, a challenging of the rules-based international order or international system, climate change, environmental degradation, loss of biodiversity, and then combine this with the great power wielded by too often nihilistic social media platforms, or Fox News, to give one very bad example. This is creating a great fraying of trust within our societies, and all this put together is kind of a perfect storm. So we're probably facing right now the end of the post Cold War era, which began at 9/11. So we really have to make a choice. Are we choosing a human-centric future or not? And the latter option should really not be an option, because otherwise we will be all collectively screwed. And the last word on this is that our civilization and our societies is more complex than ever, and complexity of any system poses great risks, and therefore the complex problems that we have cannot be resolved in a silo. And therefore I'm coming back to what I said earlier about the need for a multi-stakeholder approach. Thank you.
No, and it's an important point you're making, right? Where on the one hand we need to alert the world and shake people up, and this urge to do something, right? And at the same time we want to inspire people about you can actually do something. There's things that's inside our control, and if we collectively try to move towards the right direction, if we have the best and most brilliant minds together with those who maybe have the capital, together with everybody who can help, I think this is a very, very interesting perspective. Because I think on the one hand, it's this tendency of we do see there's lots of volatility happening. There's lots of things that are, when you think about climate change, COVID, conflicts, things that are going on in the world. Unfortunately, specifically in the hunger space, we see that, decades of human progress have essentially rolled in the wrong direction because of that. But at the same time, I think I would say we still need to try. We need to try to actually then move in the right direction. I think this is where technology can actually help us move in the right direction. And maybe just giving this to Nicola, then talking about AI in particular, because why are you excited about this, and why should other people on this call be excited about AI then?
I am excited about it. I have been for some years now. I really think there's a lot of possibilities that drive straight through some of the paradigms that we've worked with for many, many years. And I really like the idea that we have this opportunity right now. We're connecting, we've got large amounts of computing power, we've got a lot of diversity, we've got new data coming in, we've got all sorts of ideas that are coming at every level. In terms of solutionizing, I am really excited by lots of that. And that's why I think I want people to be curious about how they can solve their problems. Now, I know I need to be sort of careful about that, because there are issues that come from those who are creating opportunities, perhaps in a negative way. But at the same time, I'm really hopeful for the fact that what we're doing now is we're starting to understand ourselves more, and what we need to hold on to as a species. What ethically, what morally do we want to hold true, and keep that within the frameworks. And a lot of people are working now developing frameworks at the platform level, not just at the application level, so that in fact the whole infrastructure has a far more sensitive an awareness of the people that it's engaging than it would have done, say, a few years ago. So I think it's really allowing us to connect the complexity of our lives to the simplicity of some of the solutions that we can create, because some of the solutions are incredibly simple. You can give technologies to people and they will say, I don't want to use it for that, but I can use it for something that I really need. And I think we need to really listen. I mean, that little girl who thought of something that solved an enormous climate change problem in India. I'm so admiring of somebody who takes a very complex system and solves a very big problem simply. Really, really fantastic. So I think it's allowing us to be clever. It's allowing us to look at ourselves and be really considerate about who we really are. It's also allowing us to build stronger partnerships. So we need to build stronger partnerships and we need to be able to connect. So I really am excited by the idea that we can do that too. So there's lots more that we can do. And I love the idea that actually, if we can be far more aware of what humans really need, perhaps we can talk to them in a far more authentic and honest way.
Wow, yeah, those are strong words, and I think like this is a perfect segue also into the next actually round of the topic that I still want to cover before we go into the audience questions. Like it's about like scaling innovations or technologies, and like this is because like you were saying, like like if we're taking this small little idea, like it can create something big and meaningful. So Michael, maybe from your work, is there anything that you say has reached global scale, and like what has been the success factor in getting there?
Yeah, so from a technology point of view, it's clear that the availability of cloud computing and cloud services has significantly increased the pace of innovation across the world and across organizations, both technology sector and other sectors, and has really provided fertile ground for scaling up to global reach. And of course, the flip side of that, the equation then means that for the people and for the regions where connectivity bandwidth is low to non-existent, there is need for hybrid solutions so that you can leverage the benefit of cloud computing when you're connected, but you can still operate when you're not. In terms of specific technologies, again, coming back to your point earlier, Bernard, AI, broadly speaking, and through cloud computing has been made available at a global scale. It does come down to the specific use cases in which the AI capabilities are applied before it actually starts to generate any real value. In terms of success factor or success indicators, at the end of the day, it comes down to whether people can use the technology that we're building. So does it solve a real challenge, one that's important to the beneficiaries? Is it intuitive to use? And do you, as a user of the technology or an integrator of the technology, do you fully understand both the opportunities for positive impact as well as the risks of involved in introducing the technology into the ecosystem? So I think along with the benefits of the global scale, it's important to maintain awareness of what the technology can do, as well as provide accessible scaling and capacity building for organizations that do want to engage with that, to fully understand how to leverage the technologies and be more self-sufficient in terms of using it. So I think that's key for technology engagements, that the technology is made available, but there is also capacity building and skilling and training made available so that people actually know how to use it and to understand some of the pitfalls around using it.
Totally, and it's, I mean, talking about pitfalls, like this brings me to Sarah next, which is like speaking specifically about like the the humanitarian ecosystem, the humanitarian industry. Like, what do you see as barriers to scale, particularly there when you talk about like humanitarian purposes, and maybe how could we address these?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and one that I studied quite a lot last year. And I think the results of some of the research I did was pretty obvious, I think, maybe to a lot of humanitarians, and maybe not so obvious to technologists. Before I say anything, though, I wanted to just explain really quickly for those who are not humanitarian experts in the panel, like in the audience, is that the humanitarian industry itself is fairly opaque. and like selectively transparent at, you know, only several parts of it. There's really complex coordinating systems that have existed for several decades that take, you know, a while to get your head around. And so for sort of new market entrants to that industry, it's very difficult. And so it's very difficult to work out who the key players are within the broader industry. And you're talking about maybe an industry that turns over several dozen billion a year US, and dominated largely by several dozen agencies, really. That's the bulk of that industry. And I think for technologists looking to offer help, it's really difficult to figure out where you go, like what points can you enter into. The other thing is that, you know, for the tools and models and use cases that are being developed, most times those aren't being shared publicly, both the successes and the failures, critically the failures, because it is also a deeply competitive industry, and there's a limited pot of money that a lot of humanitarian agencies are trying to get access to deliver life-saving assistance. That's a really critical sort of ground truth in terms of what the industry looks like. But, you know, those two factors really limit and put constraints on cross-industry collaboration between the technology industry and the humanitarian industry. And, you know, sometimes there's gatekeepers on both sides. You'll have sort of account managers on the technology side. You'll have, you know, other people who are senior vice presidents or people who are handling sort of strategic corporate partnerships who might not necessarily let the problem owners connect directly with the technologists, and that's a weakness in my assessment. But then also, I think there's a linguistics problem. So oftentimes when I speak to technologists, they don't understand really what it looks like to live in an active conflict and what the real challenges are, both from a human security perspective and a rights-based perspective. Not to sound too 1990s about it, but humanitarian action is all about trying to ensure that the rights of people affected by armed conflict are upheld and protected. And how do we make sure that for two industries, technology and humanitarian industry, that have a challenge with accountability, frankly, if we're really honest, how do we make sure that those agencies can cooperate together to really fulfill those rights and protect those populations? And I think trying to develop that multilingual capability within all of us is a really important problem to solve. And the last issue, I think, is really trying to take the sort of human-centered approach in scale, right? You have to not focus on the technology, and it's really hard not to do that for some people. I think this is really about trying to, as Elizabeth was saying, you know, we're really looking from a community-based perspective, from a human-based perspective, to think about what problem are we trying to solve? What problems do communities themselves really have? And how can we look at technology as one tool in the toolbox to accelerate solutions to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think part of the challenge here is also, like, I would say is even worse when it comes to like some of the funding that you're talking about, like, because like, I think from my perspective, we oftentimes see like in the private sector for things that, you know, we celebrate like risk taking, we celebrate the crazy ideas that then get successful. For a lot of the work that's in social impact or in the humanitarian space, it's oftentimes like, well, we want you to have 100% assurance that no single dollar might ever be at risk of not being you know, it all has to be successful. And I think this is like one of the mindsets where, and you know, a couple of you were mentioning this, like, you know, kind of it's like risk capital, risk funding, even from governments, grants, that type of thing. I mean, like I see this, like, I mean, we're running an accelerator specifically for that in the social impact space. Like, I mean, what we're doing is great, but we need a lot more of that. And I think we need, you know, more funders, more governments, more foundations, more companies, but then also, I mean, actually the private sector. And like, that's what brings me to Micah, and like the specific question about, you know, you are actually scaling your solution, your startup that's scaling. Like, is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of like, you know, how do we scale it? Like, how do we scale tech?
Thank you, Bernard. And you know, you do need more. You just said we need more foundations and we need more activity. And if you look at scaling companies and you look at startups going up right up into the unicorn stratosphere at the moment in both technology as well as any company, you can see a great deal of failure in the first couple of years, and then a very small number of companies last to that 50 million or 100 million or $1 billion in company value mark. And so if we take that across to, you know, ideas and how we scale those ideas, it really is important to understand that the attributes of scaling up an organization are the same for an NGO, for a humanitarian idea, for an initiative, for an activist mindset or for a commercially viable organization. Those attributes are really getting that company growth culture right, which means having a superior company culture from the get-go. So we talk about human-centric humanitarian ideas and using technology for good. How about just having employees that really want to come to work, that share the same values? It's really about that decentralized leadership. It's blending those technologies as well as everything we know from organizational growth is that, and we've got great resignation that's out there. So it's not just people that are underprivileged that are having trouble with the certainty of their future. It's people that are extremely privileged that don't have a conflict on at the moment are still having trouble navigating their path forward. Things around mental health are a big topic. So if you have an engaged team and they are constantly sharing this with customers, it stands to reason you're going to have engaged customers who buy and who become loyal. The customers are the ones who are going to want to do the marketing for you. And this is no different if you're for profit or for purpose or a purpose beyond profit organization as well, which I believe diversity, inclusion, and equity needs to be at the forefront of almost everything you do in order to avoid the great resignation, in order to make sure that you attract and retain the best talent. And you really want that decentralized leadership, because on the great days, your employees will value working for you and not look elsewhere. And that's how you scale any organization, is that no one will look elsewhere. They will stay. The best people will put all of their time and effort into what your cause is. So it's also about routines though, Bernard. So it's really important to understand a startup might seem like we're all wearing t-shirts. Occasionally I wear t-shirts to the office, but I much prefer to be a little more formal and professional and business-like. It really brings my most professional approach to work. So we want to be fluid in our decisions and able to adapt to the situation, but we need that routine. Routine sets you free. It's really important to have that. So just because we're startups and we're software oriented doesn't mean we just wear t-shirts and make stuff up all the time. And sort of lastly, I would sort of say, we're talking about humanitarian humans. What about the business leader humans? What about the humans on this call? What about the humans that have dialed in and are sharing some very passionate pleas and very passionate comments here? Your mental fitness and mind fitness and ability to be able to share what's going on for you, for your number one, to have an awakening that what you're doing is really what you want to be doing. And number two, to be able to share it with others on a regular basis. If we have people that are comfortable being vulnerable with each other, leaders, technologists, AI generators, we can hear and see some of the passion going on here. And it's because we're able to be a little more vulnerable than what is normally rewarded. It's rewarded in the business sector. It's not rewarded to be totally vulnerable about the failures you're dealing with, about the tripping over failures. Like you said, every single dollar needing to go towards a good cause. We really want unicorns of humanity. We don't want more tech unicorns. We want unicorns of humanitarian world. That's IR 5.0. It's when every unicorn that is created from today onwards is a technology for good company, or a company that is standing for what we stand for. And that's how we scale up in the humanitarian era.
Nice. And I think like a lot of people applaud you for those efforts in particular, and like actually like contributing and trying to be like, positively impacting the world. And then maybe just to Elizabeth, and like this is where like last question on scaling before we get to audience question, like, how important are ecosystems or partnerships for scaling? Are they important? Do we care?
I think they are important, and I think that's what everybody almost in this call has been emphasizing. We are talking about the stakeholders involved in all our initiatives, whether it's the innovations, whether it's the programs that you're taking in our countries. You can't go there without the government. You need the policy people. You need the local NGOs, you need the local partners, you need the community-based organizations that are there. We need the tech partners, we need the private sector to be able to also pump in money and support this. We need them so that they can be able, I think what most of the private sector has done is they have the CSR, okay? They have the CSR projects, and some of them is just a way of giving back to the community. And I think loosely translated to just say that you're giving back to the community, trying to say you're making good. But sometimes that good does not add so much value to the community. So if we worked in together, if we talked to each other, if we trusted each other more, if we worked together, we could be able to be working for one, we are working for one people, one planet, for the prosperity of that people. And I believe by that, it would mean we we stop competing against each other. And now we keep on saying, as especially in the NGO, we keep on saying that you're not competing against each other. But I think every week of the day, we are competing against those grants. We are competing against so many things. And that has eroded the trust that we have. So meaning the working together has really seemingly gone down and down. So the more we can be able to continue working together and speak together so that we can be able to build that trust, then we shall be able to scale our tech opportunities and innovations from the proof of concept. I believe if we were to just run a round of like a poll and ask how many proof of concept that people have in their various organizations, there are so many. And it's just because we are just working in silos. So how about if we manage to work in partnership, then I believe we can be able to scale our projects to the next level.
No, it's very important. And like I think part of this is also just to emphasize, I guess there's an element of humility and like being willing to share stuff even if you think it's not perfect. Like because like there's a problem oftentimes that people do not want to share because like they say like, wow, you know, like it's not yet there and like it's still early stage. And then but the other aspect there is like you also need to invest time. Like, and I think this oftentimes overlooked is not just the willingness, you also need to put time into making that happen. Because like in order to actually reap the benefits of partnerships or ecosystem, somebody has to do that. I mean, it's still, if you are doing something alone, you can plan your own time. But like if you're leading a team, like somebody on a team has to have dedicated capacity to actually do that, which is quite interesting. Now, I'd love to continue this like for a couple of hours, but like I want to close us out like in 4 minutes. But like, so maybe just can we, let's try to some of the audience questions. One question that came in and which is like, how do tech solutions help the ultra poor communities with limited skills on tech? I don't know if anybody, any of the panel members is, maybe just raise your hand if you want to take it. Anybody? Otherwise, I guess I'm gonna throw it back to Elizabeth because like you do work with some of the like most farm communities, but like, what do you say to that? Like, do tech solutions have the opportunity to help ultra poor communities, or are they left out?
I think there is an opportunity for the tech community to be able to help the poorest of the poorest. And as I had mentioned earlier about the digital literacy, that will go a long way in closing that gap, because the digital literacy means they can also be able to access most of the information. So whether it is education, whether it is health, nowadays you have telehealth. So you can be able to access most of the things that they may need to develop themselves and improve their livelihoods.
Okay, that was a strong answer. So like, I hope that whoever asked the question, this answered your question. Like, otherwise, I think check out the World Humanitarian Forum on like, well, like LinkedIn, Twitter, like different sites, Instagram. Like, I'm sure like you'll find us. Like, we're happy to discuss further. Next question that was submitted here, which was, could AI technology enable and ensure that we you know, the future humanity is closing the gap between, or the gap, or is it worsening the gap between like the wealthy and those who do not have the wealth? I don't know, maybe I'll give this to Jarmo. Is volunteering? Yes.
Yeah, just a quick word. Unfortunately, so far, tech has widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and you know, it's widened the gap, especially between the ultra rich and just the regular millionaires. So we do have a problem in our hands here. But of course, tech can help, but it's about the political will and mobilizing that political will, and that has to come from all stakeholders together. But governments do have an important role in this, and global digital cooperation, and factors such as making sure that that everybody pays their fair share through taxation is an important part. So it's everything at the kitchen sink that you have to throw at it. Thank you.
Totally. And maybe as the AI expert, Nicola, like what do you say? Are you more optimistic or more pessimistic?
I'm much more optimistic. Of course, I'm going to be. I think there's real possibilities. I know. When somebody has to be. But I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, I liked one of the questions that came in around ethical AI and social good and how they link and where they diverge. And I'd really like to answer that one, if that's all right, Bernard. Yeah, no. Yeah, okay. I think there's some really interesting work that's been done where we're looking at all the different frameworks for ethical AI, particularly with any form of technology. And I'm seeing, or the research is saying, that in fact there's a convergence of the various, shall we say, principles such as transparency, fairness, privacy and freedom, trust. They seem to be coming through as a very constant similarity amongst the different papers and research bodies. But what I think is diverging is that actually we're only getting those that information from richer countries, from those who actually have the time and the opportunity to debate this. What we need to have are those who perhaps are not so wealthy in time and wealthy in resources to have a view on what they think is ethical, what is important to them in the framework. And so where it diverges is that it doesn't have a full viewpoint from everybody who I think matter in this debate. So that was my answer to the question.
Perfect. No, and I think it's very good. So Sarah, you want to add to this? And like I was allowed another 5 minutes, so like we're not yet over time. So Sarah, over to you.
I'll be really brief. I think this all comes back to also a really critical issue around regulation, both in how states deploy technologies against their own citizens or in the interest of their citizens, but also how technology firms themselves are able to develop it. There are two problems in this world right now at the moment: the lack of trust in government institutions and the widening political polarization around that. So that makes it very difficult for governments to step into this space and regulate when their citizens don't necessarily feel like they have the capabilities to do so. And the other challenge has been the pace at which technology is developed means that policymakers, the best intended ones, have a really hard time regulating. Now, I am optimistic too, Nicola, but I'm also a pragmatist, and having worked in conflict-affected environments for 20 years and looking at geopolitical tensions on the rise, particularly fueled by a sort of cyber arms race, I'm pretty concerned and perhaps a bit more pragmatic as to how technologies might, how states might deploy these technologies to reduce agency and autonomy, freedom of choice for their citizens, access to information. In a conflict-affected environment, is very easy these days to deploy technologies to micro-target the information that 500,000 people receive and then influence their behaviors as to whether they seek safe passage and refuge by crossing a border or whether they stay. There are a lot of risks out there, and I don't think we are anywhere close to being able to really identify what these mean. So yes, great opportunities for sure, but I think given the geopolitical contexts of the moment, I'm a little bit less than optimistic.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those points where every technology can be a force of good and a force of bad, and I think it's all our responsibility and to try to make the world a better place. So like I think is where like there is a question about like, yes, is it all good or is it all bad? Of course it can be both. Now, and like I think the element of like the responsibility of each individual and of governments and so on, I think is just really, really important. And I will have to close this out here. And again, I want to like, I can't give everybody the floor here anymore. Like, so I thank you also for joining us here today, submitting questions on the chat. I want to thank all the experts joining from across the globe, actually, as we're here together virtually right now. And, you know, it just goes to show that we can use technology to bring people together. And you know, right now during the pandemic, but we can also certainly leverage innovation to continue working on some of the world's toughest challenges and solving the SDGs. So with this, I I want to say thank you again for your attention. Thank you to everybody, and join the World Humanitarian Forum online and stay tuned. Thank you.